If you're tired of American politics, then I've got good news for you. This episode is almost completely politics-free.
Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is curled up in my arms, unsure if that's where he wants to be, or if he wants to go back doing his impersonation of a parrot. Isn't that right, you little shithead? Silly boy. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy, and he's cat. Get over it. This is a news show episode where I cover stories in the news that are related to things like atheism, secularism, science, or I find just plain interesting. Next episode will be a chapter or two from the Apocrypha, and if all goes according to plan, I'll be joined by Dustin from the Atheist Nomads podcast. Dustin is a former seminary student and was on the verge of graduating, if I remember correctly, when he realized that religion was all bullshit. Judith is the book we'll be reading from, and he told me that he really wanted to be involved in the recording of that episode because he was familiar with the book, and it was one of his favorites. I won't spoil why he liked it, but suffice it to say that there's a couple of hugely successful movies that have a very similar story. So, let's get to the news.
Have I helped your unbelief?
Oh, yes. Yes, I believe. I believe in death. I believe in disease. I believe in injustice and inhumanity and torture and anger and hate. I believe in murder. I believe in pain. I believe in cruelty and infidelity. I believe in slime and stink and in every crawling, putrid thing, every possible ugliness and corruption, you son of a bitch! I believe! In you.
This comes from Jezebel.com. Catholic leaders attempt to tantalize millennials with sexy new app nicknamed Cinder. This week, a technologically savvy archbishop in Scotland figured out a way to help Catholics find a better confessional booth and help the church cater to millennials, a group it's been bleeding like the stigmata on a Sunday. Time reports that Edinburgh Archbishop Leo Cushley invented an app which, quote, lets users search for the nearest Holy Mass, confessional, or diocesanal statistics, and guide the faithful from their current location to the nearest Catholic church. It is called the Catholic app, which is deeply unfortunate. Cleverer people on the internet and in the media have taken to calling it Cinder, though that implies it allows you to confess your sins, receive your penance, and be absolved all via your phone. Frankly, a much better idea and one they should consider implementing. Want to get filled up by a Catholic priest? There's an app for that. I think that this shows just how out of touch the church is with people today. I seriously doubt that there's a large number of people out there thinking, you know, I really need to go to confession, but I just don't know where one is. Patreon listeners will have already heard this story, but on my last day at my old job, I took a half day to go to a car museum in Nashville since I didn't know when the next time I'd be able to get up there to see the museum. While I was waiting for it to open, I wandered around downtown Nashville. One of the places I went past was the oldest Catholic church in the city. It was about 8 a.m., and not only were the doors locked, but they had a tall iron fence surrounding the church with padlocks on it, and an alarm system on the church. Hardly a welcoming image to project, and certainly one that should have you questioning your faith, since why does God need an alarm system, let alone an iron fence and locks on the doors? I'll have pics of the church in the show notes. But hey, if this sexy new app makes the church happy, I'm all for it. This comes from cruxnow.com. Pope Francis calls abortion horrendous crime and very grave sin. Often faulted by critics as not being sufficiently clear when it comes to the Church's negative judgment on abortion, Pope Francis on Sunday couldn't have been more firm in calling it a very grave sin and a horrendous crime. I was thinking on the attitude of sending the kids back before they were born. This horrendous crime, they send them back because it's better like that, because it's more comfortable. It's a great responsibility, a very grave sin, Francis said. The comments came in an interview with the Italian Catholic media outlets TV 2000, boy, that doesn't sound a bit dated, and Blue Radio, released on Sunday after the closing of the Jubilee Year of Mercy. Fuck it now, it's gonna be the Jubilee Year of Vengeance, baby! His words came as he was remembering 2 moments of the Holy Year, which he found to be particularly memorable, asked specifically about the 12 Fridays of Mercy. The Pope talked about 2 situations: visiting 15 women, survivors of modern-day slavery, forced prostitution and exploitation, and visiting a hospital ward for newborn babies. In the hospital, Francis was especially touched by the crying of an inconsolable mother who'd been pregnant with triplets. One of the babies, however, didn't survive. There was this woman who cried in front of her twins, very small but very beautiful. The third had died, the Pope said, visibly moved by the recollection. She cried for her dead son while she caressed the other 2, the gift of life. It was in this moment, he continued, that he thought about the attitude of sending the kids back. So apparently, the Pope saying that priests can dole out forgiveness to women who've had abortions is considered being soft on abortion. And he has to counter that image by coming out and saying that abortion is still evil. This is because people thinking that Pope Frankie is somehow softening on abortion. There's a term for this kind of thing, but unfortunately I don't remember it, and I can't think of any way to Google it, so I turn it up. Still, just goes to show he is not nearly as progressive as some people like to think he is.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
This comes from the BBC.com. Ancient corn cob shows how maize conquered the world. Farming by early civilization started a process of domestication that produced the sweet yellow corn we use today for food or fuel. Ancient DNA extracted from the corn cob gives a window into the past to the time when maize was first grown. The cob is one of the oldest in the world and was excavated from a cave in the Tehuacan Valley, Mexico. Based on archaeological evidence and modern DNA evidence, we already know that maize was domesticated in Mexico sometime between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago, said Nathan Wales of the Natural History Museum of Denmark in Copenhagen. Kind of funny that it's these guys doing the study and not somebody closer. What we did not know, using modern DNA or other information, is really how this process gets going and the timing of different events in the past. The interesting thing about this is that even though the cob is tiny, only about an inch long, it isn't terribly different, genetically speaking, from modern corn. This means that there were only a handful of genes involved in turning it from something that looked like baby corn into the plant we know today. Also, this sample dates from about 5,000 years after it's thought that humans first began domesticating the plant. It's dramatically different than the wild variety, but not so different that you'd have an easy time telling them apart, whereas the modern plant looks nothing like the wild variety at all. Another benefit of this discovery, though not one mentioned in the article, is that this version of the plant might have genes which protect it from things that modern species are vulnerable to. It's a lot easier to reintroduce a gene into a species than insert a new one, because it's not always obvious what the effect of the new gene will be. CRISPR makes it cheaper and easier, but one of the things we've learned over the years is that it isn't necessarily a single gene which is responsible for a characteristic. Sometimes it's a suite of genes, and it isn't always obvious which ones are involved. The article does state that they've been able to tell that corn still wasn't a staple crop at the time this ear was grown. It looks like it was just something that they relied on during certain parts of the year.
All systems go. Prepare for countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's off to adventure in the amazing year 400 billion with Commander Horse-headed faithful companion Cadet City as they roam the endless uncharted regions of space at speeds so fantastic they level the imagination. Prepare to surge to sublight speed.
This comes from the independent.co.uk. Stunning new theory of gravity suggests there's no such thing as dark matter. A new theory of gravity explains the way galaxies rotate without the need for the theoretical presence of dark matter, according to a renowned expert in string theory. According to mainstream physics, more than 80% of all matter cannot be seen. Its presence and the extra gravity it provides is required under the current thinking to explain why stars do not fly off into the universe as their galaxies spin. However, Professor Erik Verlinde of Amsterdam University has now published a research paper in which he argues his startling theory of emergent gravity, first put forward in 2010. Explains the movement without the need for dark matter, according to a report on the Phys.org website. We do have evidence that this new view of gravity actually agrees with the observations, he told Phys.org. At large scales, it seems gravity just doesn't behave the way Einstein's theory predicts. The current theory of gravity appears to work well in most situations, but scientists have struggled to show it is compatible with the strange world of tiny particles described by quantum physics. It is thought that two of the most important theories of physics cannot both be true. This has prompted the search for a way to resolve the apparent contradictions. Many theoretical physicists like me are working on a revision of the theory, and some major advancements have been made, Professor Verlinde said. I have to admit that I've always found the theory of dark matter a little difficult to understand. It seems counterintuitive to me to say that because the universe doesn't behave the way we expect at the scale of galaxies, there's an entirely different form of matter responsible for it. During the Q&A section of his talk in Nashville last year, someone asked Neil deGrasse Tyson about why dark matter makes more sense than something like what's known as the MOND, or Modified Newtonian Dynamics theory. According to Tyson, having something like MOND be accurate would call for a larger rewriting of our understanding of the laws of physics than would something like dark matter. I'm not going to pretend to understand all of it, but his full explanation made sense to me. It will be interesting to see if this new theory holds up to scrutiny. If it does, then it might open up some new possibilities for space travel. Before you scoff, think about this. Our understanding of what the limits to space travel come, in no small part, from Einstein's work. The theory of relativity says that because of things like gravity, we can never go faster than the speed of light. If, however, it turns out that Einstein's theory is like the math used to calculate the motions of the planets in the pre-heliocentric model days, i.e. it works but it isn't completely accurate, then we might find out that there are ways to do things like faster-than-light travel. Part of me hopes to holy hell that there's a connection between this theory and the EM drive that's been discussed in a NASA paper recently. The drive seems to work, even though no one really knows why. It might simply be that they screwed something up in their experiment, so further research will show that it doesn't work. We'll just have to wait and see. I'm crossing my fingers, however, that if this new theory of gravity turns out to be correct, it also has clues as to ways of making the EM drive or some other drive possible. Because if the EM drive does work and it can be made more efficient, then we'll be able to, at the very least, get around the solar system in almost no time. If we had an economical way to produce enough thrust to make it feel to the crew that they were experiencing normal Earth-type gravity, Pluto would only be a month's journey from Earth.
Maybe it's a little early. Maybe the time is not quite yet. But those other worlds, promising untold opportunities, beckon. Silently, they orbit the sun, waiting.
This story comes from ScienceAlert.com. A decommissioned NASA rover might have found evidence of past life on Mars. Geologists working in northern Chile have found similarities between hot spring silica deposits on Earth and deposits photographed on Mars 9 years ago, and they think they could be evidence of past life on the red planet. These types of deposits on Earth typically contain microorganism fossils, and though NASA's Spirit rover couldn't look for evidence of life back in 2007, the research could prompt another rover visit to the home plate plateau on Mars. The team from Arizona State University went looking for silica structures in El Tatillo similar to those snapped on Mars, and say the closest matches were those produced by a combination of biological and non-biological processes. Hot spring deposits created with the help of tiny organisms. The fact that microbes play a role in producing the distinctive silica structures at El Tatillo raises the possibility that the Martian silica structures formed in a comparable manner, says one of the researchers, Steve Ruff. In other words, with the help of organisms that were alive at the time. The idea that hot springs had created the home plate deposits was raised when they were first photographed, but the findings in Chile give the hypothesis more credibility. That's partly because the environment at El Tatillo is so Mars-like. Freezing temperatures at night, plenty of ultraviolet light from the sun, and thin, dry air. Such conditions provide a better environmental analog for Mars than those of Yellowstone National Park and other well-known geothermal sites on Earth, write Ruff and his colleague Jack Farmer in Nature. The researchers don't rule out the possibility that the silica deposits on Mars were created through non-biological processes, but they also say the finger-like patterns in Chile are among the most Mars-like of any silica deposits on Earth. Okay, let's go all negative here for a moment and say that it's non-biological processes which are responsible for these formations. That's still pretty big news because it tells us that there are other ways such things can form. However, I'm really having a hard time looking at the pictures of these things and saying that it's impossible life didn't make them. To go back to the dark matter subject, it's easier for us to explain this by saying that it's the product of biological processes than it is to say it's the product of non-biological ones. So you've got to kind of lean towards life being responsible for it. I really need to see if I can sucker some exobiologist to be a guest on the show. And I'll have a link to it in the show notes. I'm not going to go over it in this episode, but there is a new study which says that life, which is a hybrid of carbon and silicon based, might be possible. It's complicated, and there's reasons why silicon solely based life is unlikely, but still, It's awfully interesting that we have got evidence life can take a slightly different form than what we know it of. All right, now this next bit isn't from a news story, but it's an email from a science organization. In recent years, it's become clear that planets are common around stars in our galaxy, and the number of possible abodes of life number in the billions. The number of civilizations that inhabit our galaxy is still unknown. But thanks to SETI at home, anyone can search for these civilizations using their home computer or mobile phone. But SETI at home still needs your help. It's been an exciting year for SETI at home, in addition to our ongoing search for extraterrestrial radio emissions with the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico. We've started analyzing data collected by the Breakthrough Listen project at the Green Bank Telescope, the largest fully steerable radio telescope in the world. Breakthrough Listen will soon start collecting data at the Parkes Radio Telescope, the largest steerable radio telescope in the southern hemisphere, and SETI at home could analyze this data. To do so, SETI at home needs two things. First, we need you and your friends and family. The current flood of data requires more processing power than SETI at home volunteers currently provide. Please spread the word about SETI at home. Second, SETI at home needs the funding to obtain the hardware and develop software required to handle this new data source. SETI at home has obtained only 1/3 of the $450,000 in funding it needs for the coming year. If SETI at home doesn't meet these funding goals, expansion to new telescopes may not be possible. SETI at home, for those of you not familiar with it, uses the processing power of your PC when it would otherwise be idle to analyze radio signals from space to see if there might be something out there. It uses a software program known as BOINC, which a number of scientific organizations use to crowdsource computer processing power. Everything is free, and there's all kinds of different research you can help support by running BOINC on your PC. I know that climatologists use it, as do people doing drug development, and just about any field of science you can think of. Given that we can expect the sciences to be under attack with the Trump administration taking control of the government next year, this is basically a free way for you to fight against that, which takes no effort once you set up the software, and install time is about the same as downloading an app on your phone. 5-10 minutes tops, and it's running. I've presently got it installed on all my PCs, and it's the reason I never turn them off, because the software runs when I'm not using the computers. And now, this important message.
Have y'all ever wondered what it's like to be a redneck with empathy? Have you never heard of a Southerner who isn't a blathering bigot? Well, have I got the show for you? It's the Podunk Polymath Podcast, hosted by myself, Chris, and it's the sentiments of a secular, sarcastic, screwed-up Southern SJW and skeptic. You can find me and the show on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or your favorite podcatcher. Y'all stop on by and take it easy now, okay?
Just one science story here, but one that's kind of important, I think. This comes from Futurism.com. Intelligence may stem from a basic algorithm in the human brain. The human brain is the most sophisticated organ in the human body, as opposed to the human brain that's in a pig's body. Somebody was getting paid by the word. The things that the brain can do and how it does them have even inspired a model of artificial intelligence. Actually, it's inspired a number of models. Now, a recent study published in the journal Frontiers in Systems Neuroscience shows how human intelligence may be the product of a basic algorithm. This algorithm is found in the theory of connectivity. A relatively simple mathematical logic underlies our complex brain computations, according to researcher and author Joe Zinn, neuroscientist at the Medical College of Georgia and at Augusta University, co-director of the Augusta University Brain and Behavior Discovery Institute and Georgia Research Alliance, eminent scholar in cognitive and systems neurobiology. He first proposed the theory in October 2015. Basically, It's a theory about how the acquisition of knowledge, as well as our ability to generalize and draw conclusions from them, is a function of billions of neurons assembling and aligning. We present evidence that the brain may operate on an amazingly simple mathematical logic, Zen said. The theory describes how groups of similar neurons form a complexity of cliques to handle basic ideas or information. These groups cluster into functional connectivity motifs, which handle every possible combinations of ideas. More cliques are involved in more complex thoughts. I know the source isn't exactly stellar, but it does have links to the original paper, and what I could understand of the paper jibes with what the article says. It might seem counterintuitive that thought can be reduced to a simple formula, but it's actually not all that far-fetched. 2 years ago, researchers were able to successfully replicate the mound-building behavior of termites and robots with a fairly unsophisticated program. What seems to be something pretty complex can actually be reduced to a handful of simple rules. In the case of the robots, it offers the potential to have automated drones building things like sandbag walls or handling hazardous work that poses a risk to humans. In the case of human behavior, it has some pretty nasty implications because unethical people could use this to manipulate people in ways they wouldn't normally behave. Imagine a politician who had a team of people figuring out the right combinations of things for him to say that would ensure, no matter what his opponent did, he'd always get elected, with no chance of the politician undermining his campaign, even if he was caught in a sex scandal. There's also some other precedents for this. A brilliant but troubled mathematician named George R. Price developed a formula to explain altruism. When it was proved correct, he went mad and killed himself. I'll have a link in the show notes to an article about him and a biography about him by Orrin Harmon.
Oh, fellow members of the Roman Senate, hear me. Shall we continue to build palace after palace for the rich? Or shall we aspire to a more noble purpose and build decent housing for the poor? How does the Senate vote? For the poor! Good.
Okay, I'm not going to spend this segment talking about the death of Castro or Trump's picking a billionaire who hates the public school system to be the Secretary of Education. I am going to be talking about the local Democratic Party and how I discovered that they actually exist, even if they don't seem to be doing anything. I get emails from the Tennessee Democratic Party every so often. Usually these are announcing things like their fancy fundraising Jackson Day dinner. Why they think that it's a good idea to name it after a slave-owning genocidal maniac is beyond me. I tend to find these annoying because there's just no fucking way I can afford to go to one. The ticket price is several $100s, and they never seem to have an event that is free, or even a modest sum like $20. Not that I've got a car to actually get to one of these events, but it's the principle of the thing. The last email I got from them was announcing that they'd be holding discussions in various parts of the state to talk about what went wrong with the election. I clicked the link because even though I probably wouldn't be able to go, since I don't have a car, it's at least worth checking out. They have a listing of locations, dates, and times that I scroll down, trying to find when the one closest to me is going to be held. I find the date, but no location is given. We're the only place in Tennessee that they haven't found a location for yet. This gets my blood a-boiling, so I go to the Progressive Gallatin group on Facebook, since I know that there I won't have to deal with any trolls and make a nice post at how I find it to be irritating that they haven't found a spot. A short time later, the chair of the Sumner County Democratic Party replies. She invites me to a function they're having and makes nice but bland comments. Doesn't really explain why they haven't found the spot yet. And doesn't really explain why, after living here for almost 20 years, I'm just now finding out that they actually have such an organization. in this county. My blood pressure spiked at that moment, and I had to really struggle to calm myself down before responding. I've been a member of that group for over a year now, and this was the first time I've seen anything from them that such a group exists. This isn't a hugely active group, so the post didn't get buried. Nobody made any. I called them on this, and the reply I got back was, "Well, I wasn't sure if such posts would be okay with the admins." The name of the group is Progressive Gallatin, so I don't think that they'd object, especially since the admin is a gay man. I said that it'd be better just to make the posts and then apologize later if it turned out that they were against the rules. There's 74 members in the group. I don't think that he's going to toss anyone out, especially not the head of the local Democratic Party, for posting things that the Democrats are doing. Next, there's a post by the outreach director of the Tennessee Democratic Party who apparently just discovered this particular group. She's lived in the area for 10 years now, but I can't fault her not knowing about the group because the only way I found out about it was that I was added to it by the admin, whom I knew from a Nashville atheist Facebook group. You would think that the head of the county DNC would have thought to add her before this, but I guess not. Anyways, she says that she's not happy about them not having a place to conduct the meeting, but due to limited resources, their options are scanty, and they're having trouble finding a place. Perfectly reasonable response and understandable. Now, I happen to know of a place in Nashville where they might be able to hold the meeting. It meets their need of being inexpensive, as it's free, but there might be problems with holding it at that location because it's a community center located in a police station. It's where I saw Neil Carter speak last year. It's certainly large enough to handle the number of people they're expecting, but there might be legal issues with them being a political party. I mentioned that. Then later, I realized that I know someone locally who can really help them. She's definitely liberal, what with her being an atheist who hangs out with guys like Bill Nye and various other statements she's made in interviews I've heard with her. I've also met her, am Facebook friends with her, and so I think I'm not wrong in saying that she's definitely willing to at least do something to help them because she supports the whole thing of the Democratic Party. That's Tracy Moody. Not only do I suggest to these two women from the local Democratic Party that they Facebook friend Tracy, but I go ahead and message Tracy telling her who they are and why I think that she should friend them. A day or so later, the admin from the group posts to the thread and tells the women that they have his permission to post anything related to the Democratic Party that they so choose, and he thanks them for their hard work. There hasn't been a single goddamned post since then. Well, except for the one I just made suggesting that they stream the meeting over the web so people who can't make it can see what's going on. Tracy, by the way, messaged me back saying that they hadn't requested to be her Facebook friend. Tracy's got tons of fucking experience. She knows her shit. I forget who else she's worked for, but she's worked for people who, she knows what the fuck she's doing, put it simply. She knows how to get the word out. She knows how to talk to people. But what the fuck ever, right? Now, the event that the head of the Sumner County Democratic Party invited me to is the annual holiday party for the Democrats. It's here in town, so I'll be going. It's a 2.5 hour walk for me to get there, but I'm going. It's also being held in the home of one of the ladies who posted in response to my comments. She lives in one of the whitest and wealthiest parts of town. I don't think I have to say what I expect the makeup of the attendees to be like. I'll try to behave myself while I'm there, but I fully intend to ruffle a few feathers. They may not have much to worry about from a Trump presidency, but I certainly do, and I intend to make them aware of that fact. An economic downturn will most likely mean they have to cut back on a few luxuries. For me, it determines if I'll still have a roof over my head or not. Can't wait to see the look on their faces when I show up in December on my scooter. And yes, I'll be sure to mention that I live in a trailer park. The working class helped build the Democratic Party, and it's time they were reminded of that fact. That was what cost them the election, was they didn't talk about the working class very much. And I'm not trying to belittle the issues of, women and other minorities in this country. We've gotten the worst possible outcome for them. But they didn't throw a bone to the rest of us. And I'm intelligent enough to realize that it doesn't matter what the Republicans say and what the Democrats say. I do better off under a Democratic administration than I will under a Republican one. But most people don't see it that way. They just see it, they're going to get screwed, and they're picking who's going to do the screwing. And since Trump says nice things about them, they figure he'll screw them a lot less than the Democrats will. That was the thing that really irritated me about the fundraising emails I'd get from the DNC. They were, in the run-up to the election. Almost all of them were about helping Hillary, and how much we deserved her, or she deserved to be president, rather. Now, Hillary, fantastically qualified. She would be, a great president. Even if she did nothing exceptional while she was in office, she would still be a great president because of how skillful she is. But that's not what, millions of Americans want to hear. And, one of the big failings is that the DNC did not say, when we protect the rights of minorities, we protect the rights of all people. When we make sure that our minorities have good paying jobs, everyone else has good paying jobs. You don't argue trickle down, you point out that trickle up is how things work. But that was too sophisticated, I guess. Or they were overconfident and thought, oh, look, we're going up against a psychopath. Nobody's going to be dumb enough to vote for him. We'll just cruise on in there. That didn't work out so well. So, December 10th, I will be with a bunch of rich, white women, I'm sure. I have a feeling it's going to be mostly women at this thing. We're all middle-aged, or close to it. Who are going to be thinking of their party and their life like they did when they debuted at the Spring Cotillion so many years ago. And me, guy who lives in a trailer park, who does an angry podcast, is going to walk into all that. And the great thing is, I was raised by people who have that kind of money. So I know exactly how to behave. I know the subtle little comments to drop here and there, which unsettle them. I know where their buttons are. I know how to push them. I'm going to remind them that the party, and really the country, isn't made up of rich white people. It's made up of poor people. People of different colors. And the one thing we are certain of, we are absolutely certain of, is the majority of the people after January 20th, 2017, are not going to be getting richer. They're all going to be getting poorer. And if the Democratic Party wants to have a chance at taking back this country, at putting things right, they're going to have to make an effort to make sure they talk to the poor people. They're going to have to talk to us. They're going to have to get down there and get dirty with us. I mean, if you've studied the history of politics in this country at all, and it doesn't matter which party you're talking about, there were, for decades, in every city in the country, massive party machines that ran everything. You didn't get into office unless you were part of the machine. You didn't get, you didn't get jobs if you didn't get the best jobs in the city, regardless of whether or not they were they were politically connected jobs like a government job or whatever. You didn't get any of that unless you were tied to the political machine. Now, we've broken up a lot of the things, the mechanisms that those political machines used. You can no longer give such jobs, in government as political favors. But there are elements there which aren't bad elements at all that can be used today in the 20th century or 21st century. For example, this is a simple one and it's perfectly legal to do. They do it in a lot of other places, but not here. Although I'm sure the Republicans do it. You want people at the voting booths? You have widespread notifications. Hey, you need a ride to the polling place. We will give it to you. I tried to find one during the primary so I wouldn't have to miss a day of work. Didn't happen. I mean, obviously I didn't know about the county Democratic Party, but I did post in the progressive groups that I'm a member of, hey, is the party giving rides to people, to the polls for people or not? Anybody know? Never got a response. Not one. Since the Republicans won the election and that they won everything, House, Senate, White House, all I've gotten are emails from the Democratic Party asking me stupid fucking questions like, should Michelle Obama run for office? And then, yes, I know she's a lovely woman. She's at least almost as qualified, if not as qualified as Hillary to be president, blah, blah, blah. That's not what you need to be saying to me right now. That's not what you need to be saying to the millions of Americans who are now staring down the barrel of a metaphorical gun. You need to be saying, we are the Democratic Party. We lost this round. We will win the next round. We are going to do everything we can to help you until we get control back. There's not been anything about strategizing or anything like that. It's just stupid surveys or saying, do you want to sign this card telling Ruth Bader Ginsburg not to resign? Ruth Bader Ginsburg is not going to fucking resign. I know she's tired. I know she wants to resign. But I also know that she's going to hang on there until we get a Democrat in the White House because she knows what kind of nightmare will be unleashed if a fucking Republican president replaces her. That's the thing. That's where they've lost. The DNC has lost it. They're not saying, this is what we're going to do for you. They're asking about, do I like the people, they want to run for this office or that office, or telling me to thank this person or that person. They're not saying, well, we're going to do this to help you. This is where we're going to take things now. There's been no discussion about some kind of community outreach. the African American community in this country, in the South, survived from the time of the Civil War until the civil rights, and even today, by sticking up for one another, taking care of one another, looking out for one another as best they could. That's what the Democratic Party needs to be telling people it's going to be doing for them, and not asking stupid questions like, did you vote for Donald J. Trump? Are you in favor of Trump's agenda? Do you think that... Those aren't the things you need to be telling people if you want to get Americans involved. You need to be telling them how you're going to be helping them here and now as best you can. And yes, I am going to be bringing this shit up at that party and the other activities that they have if I'm ever invited to them and I can afford to go. I understand they need the high dollar fundraisers to be able to fund the party. But at the same time, they have to have shit for the poor people because the poor people aren't going to be motivated to go out and vote if they don't feel their voice is being heard by the party. I don't know how else to communicate that to them, and I realize I'm ranting and raving at you guys, but I think you can understand where I'm coming from. You know, the party should be saying to us, we're going to do this for you. We're going to do that for you. We're going to make sure you have good jobs. We're going to make sure your kids go to good schools. We're going to make sure this and that happens for you. That's what Trump did. I mean, he not saying, I'm going to give you the best government schools. But he told those people in West Virginia, you're going to have your coal mining jobs back. Hillary, rightly, because Trump's not going to bring those jobs back. He doesn't give a shit about those people. Rightly said those jobs aren't coming back. But she didn't have a vision for how to fulfill the needs of those people. She couldn't stand there and say specifically, we're going to give you jobs. She says, we'll give you training so you can find high-tech jobs. There are no fucking high-tech jobs to be had in West Virginia. I've been to the state. High-tech is not in its vocabulary. It's beautiful. There's some nice people there. But they're even farther back in the dark ages than Tennessee is. So, you know, it's like there was a story on NPR some years back about this doctor who kept writing... He kept putting people on disability in this economically hard-hit area. And so they asked him about it. Well, why are you doing that? And he says, what choice do these people have? There are no jobs here, and even if there were, these people don't have the training to be able to do those jobs. And when he says don't have the training, he means they can't even operate a fucking smartphone. That's how bad off these people were. But if he puts them on disability, they get money. They can survive. They can have a life. Not much of one, but it's better than them begging on the streets. So, you know, what needs to happen, and what I'm going to try to get these people to understand, is that the Democratic Party has to be able to explain to people that they're going to give them jobs. They're going to give them training. They're going to find things that they can do that will pay them money. And they're going to guarantee this not by vaguely saying, oh, we'll get you jobs. They need to have a specific plan because Trump, well, he didn't have a specific plan. He could point to the closed mines and say, we're going to have that mine open again. What's Hillary gonna, what could Hillary say? Well, we'll get you training for a high-tech job. There's no high-tech jobs to be had, so any training you get, if you even get it, for reasons I'll get to in a bit, is gonna be worthless. You have to pack up and leave, but you can't afford to do that because you're fucking dirt poor. And the reason these people don't get the training that they deserve is because whenever there's a trade bill or some thing like that where the government knows, oh gosh, people, it's going to cause factories to shut down. People are going to lose their jobs. We'll have training programs for them. But we won't be able to get this trade deal passed through Congress if we include the funding for that jobs program with the trade deal. So we'll send the trade deal through first, and then we'll run the funding for the jobs program through later on. Well, the trade deal gets passed, but the funding program for the jobs programs doesn't. Because, that's evil as far as the Republicans are concerned. And really, if you've got to split off a key aspect of a trade deal to get it through Congress, maybe you shouldn't be running that trade deal through Congress. Just saying. I understand the benefits of free trade. I get all that. But I also, because it stares me in the fucking face every day, understand what the implications are for it when they don't take care of the people on this end. And we all know they're not, the people in the foreign countries aren't being taken care of at all. My apologies for being a little incoherent here at the end, but this kind of gets me riled up. Because what's that scene? In, early on in Mad Men, there's a scene where Don Draper tries to get Pete, the little Weasley douchebag, fired. And Bertram Cooper says to Don, when he doesn't fire Pete, Pete's from this wealthy family, and he says the last thing we need is for his mother to be standing there on the docks in the Hamptons talking bad about Sterling Price Cooper, whatever it was called at that point. But you get the idea. These are people who have money. They're protected by their money. They're insulated by their money. They don't have to pay the consequences for their actions like I do. I have an opportunity to bring their consequences to their faces, and I'm going to take it. I know it sounds crazy. But I'm not going to be the obnoxious asshole. Like I said, I grew up in that kind of wealth at times. I mean, Mom and I were broke after Dad took off, but Dad lived just fine a few blocks away from Johnny fucking Cash when he moved to this area. And I'm not kidding. He was a few blocks from Johnny Cash's house. So what we used to do when people came to visit in the summer is we'd take them on the tour of the local country musicians' houses, and a few blocks over was Johnny Cash and Roy Orbison. That should tell you how much money Dad has. I know how to act around those people. I know how to make them uncomfortable, and I'm going to do it. I might get tossed out. They may hate me. But maybe I'll make a fucking difference, not just for myself, but for the other people in this community. I mean, we're fucked. We are hardcore fucked, and people don't understand it. I actually told the one woman, I says, for God's sakes, read The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. It's dated, but it basically predicts how Donald Trump came to power and how you can blunt people like him from coming to power. She says she'll read it. I don't know. I hope she does. And I hope that I can convince them in the future never to hold another Christmas party in some wealthy white woman's house again, but to hold it somewhere central in town so that they get a mixture of people in there. They need to see what happens when shit goes bad. They need to know people who will personally be affected by the decisions the party makes. That is our best defense as impoverished Americans, which we all are. If you're listening to this and you're an American, you're fucking poor. I don't care who you are. I know the Cog Disc guys don't listen to me, so, fuck them. No, not really. I love them. They're a great bunch of guys. But my point is that if you're listening to me, you're probably not sitting on a 6-digit income. If you're lucky, you're making more than $30,000 a year. But on average, I'd be willing to bet that most of you aren't making much more than I am, if that. Probably a side effect of me naming the podcast The Atheist in the Trailer Park. I probably appeal primarily to poor people and who happen to be atheists. So be it. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to walk 2 miles. Well, 2.5 hours, not 2 miles. 2.5 hours in the cold in December. Now, maybe I'll get lucky and we'll have a nice warm spell and it'll be 60 degrees. I don't know. But it'll be dark when I leave. It'll be dark when I get there and they'll see me rolling up on my little Razor scooter. That ought to give them pause. And if they look at me and they think, this is not who we want in the party, well then, I guess I'll just have to make Sumner County, Tennessee, the strongest Green Party county in the country. Outside of those in California, of course. But the one thing, and I'm going to say this and then wrap up here. The one thing that really got to me was, the lady who heads the Sumner County Democratic Party says, well, we've got a website and we have all kinds of stuff, but we can't send it to you unless we have your email address. Well, how do I know to give you my email address if I don't know you're out there? Like as I said in the past, when people run for office in this town, they don't have a party affiliation in most cases. They're independent. And you have to look at their campaign signs to see which way they lean. Is it red or blue? If it's red, you know they're Republican. Well, even if they call themselves an independent, you know they're a Republican. If it's blue, you know that they call themselves a Democrat. That has to change. We have to get people in this town to not be afraid to call themselves Democrat. Even if they are in the minority. But I don't think they are. And we've got a large number of people who would naturally vote Democratic in this community if they were approached, if things were made known to them. My neighbors are all Latino. I'm fairly certain they would be more inclined to vote for a pro-immigration party than an anti-immigration party. And there is a significant number of African Americans here. And, half the county are probably women. If it's not exactly half, it's close to it. I would think that they would be concerned about their reproductive rights, which are going to be under threat thanks to Mike Pence. Okay, that's enough babbling for me. I've got to get this thing edited, posted, and do some other stuff this evening, so I thank you for putting up with me.
That's it for another episode of the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes. It's also available on Stitcher. Follow the show on Twitter at tparkatheist and on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. Email Tucker at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.